When you stand back and look at California, you see two crises at once. You see not enough housing, and that has inflated home prices and created the 5th highest rate of homelessness in the United States. And then layered on top of that, we have one of the lowest inventories of shelter available for people who become homeless. So in other words, in California, you're more likely to become homeless than almost any other state. And when you do, you're more likely to become homeless on the streets rather than in the shelter than almost any other state.
This RV lot opened just a year ago and now is among the largest in the state of California with a full wait list. It represents one city's answers to a growing crisis of RV homelessness, in which individuals without homes live long-term in RVs. Others park their RVs on city streets, and some don't even own the RVs they're living in. Instead, they rent them from an underground market of vanlords. For renters, it's one of the few options between communal shelters and the streets. But advocates and lawmakers say the arrangement is often exploitative with no tenant.
For the last 3 years, rent across America did something that felt impossible. It climbed higher and faster than at any point in modern times. From Miami to Seattle, landlords held the leverage. Rents jumped by hundreds of dollars in a single renewal, and many owners acted like tenants would absorb any increase just to avoid moving. For a while, that assumption looked right on paper because demand was intense, people were relocating, and new construction couldn't catch up fast enough. But in 2025, that grip is loosening, and in a lot of places it's snapping. Cities that were once defined by bidding wars and waiting lists are now dealing with the opposite problem: too many units and not enough renters willing or able to pay peak pricing. Developers built aggressively during the boom. Investors borrowed hard when money was cheaper, and the renter, the person the entire machine depends on, finally hit a ceiling. The result is a shift you can feel on the ground. Rents sliding, listings sitting, and landlords suddenly negotiable again. Incentives are back in a big way. Free months, waived deposits, parking included, even gift cards and move-in perks that disappeared when owners had all the power. What's happening isn't just one city having a bad year, it's a pattern spreading across multiple metros, and it's reshaping the balance of power in the rental market. The headline is simple: renters are pushing back, and supply is no longer scarce in the places that built the most. Some markets are seeing drops close to double digits, and it's happening fast enough that it's catching owners off guard. A lot of landlords aren't just trimming prices, they're trying to prevent vacancy at any cost, because an empty unit doesn't just mean lost rent, it can wreck cash flow, financing terms, and investor confidence. Now let's walk through the places where this pressure is showing up the clearest, cities that were once can't-miss rental stories and are now watching the math turn against them. Start with Austin. Austin's boom years felt unstoppable. Tech migration, remote work, huge brand energy, and a skyline full of cranes. Landlords could raise rents quickly because high earners kept arriving, and new luxury buildings leased up fast. The problem is that a lot of that growth story was tied to a very specific moment: cheap money, aggressive hiring, and the belief that the influx would continue forever. In 2025, the mood is different. Rent is down sharply year over year, vacancies have climbed, and many of those glossy new buildings aren't filling the way owners expected. You can see the shift in the incentives: months of free rent, reduced deposits, and promotions that would have been laughed off during the peak. When layoffs and hiring freezes hit the renter base that can pay top dollar, luxury supply starts competing with luxury supply, and the whole ladder slips. Miami is another city where the boom wasn't just strong, it was flashy. Pandemic relocation, remote workers, and waves of investors turned it into a high-speed rental rocket. Rents surged so hard that locals got squeezed out, and luxury everything became the default pitch. But in 2025, the shine is wearing off. Rents are lower than last year, vacancies are up in key areas, and landlords are leaning on perks to fill units. And Miami has an extra pressure point that a lot of markets don't: rising ownership costs. Insurance has become a brutal line item. HOA fees in many buildings are climbing, and newer safety requirements and assessments have made some condos dramatically more expensive to carry. When costs rise while rents fall, investors start bleeding every month, and passive income turns into a second job. Add softer short-term rental demand and more Airbnb owners shifting into long-term leasing, and you get a market that suddenly has more supply chasing fewer tenants. Atlanta was supposed to be the stable version of the Sunbelt story: jobs, growth, and relative affordability. Developers treated it like a sure thing and delivered tens of thousands of new units in a short window. But in 2025, that pipeline is colliding with reality. Rents are down, concessions are everywhere, and properties that used to fill quickly are sitting longer. The deeper issue is that renters' budgets aren't expanding at the same pace that housing costs did. Wage growth has cooled, inflation has eaten spending power, and younger renters are adjusting by doubling up, moving back with family, or choosing cheaper pockets. When demand softens even a little, a market that just added a mountain of new apartments feels it immediately. Quick pause. If you're into these kinds of real-world money shifts, where the numbers change and the whole culture moves with them, take a second to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep tracking where rents are actually breaking, what incentives are showing up, and what this means for renters and investors as 2025 unfolds. Subscribing helps you catch the next breakdown while it's still developing, not after it's old news. Las Vegas is a city that understands cycles better than most. It's built on risk, optimism, and the belief that the next wave is always coming. For a while, that wave looked like inbound migration, California spillover, and short-term rental profits. But by 2025, the air is coming out. Rents have dropped compared to the peak, vacancies are higher, and entire pockets of the metro are competing harder for tenants. And Las Vegas has an extra pressure point that a lot of markets don't: rising ownership costs. Tourism-related income matters. If the tourism engine isn't roaring the way investors assumed, the broader market loses some of its fuel. On top of that, when short-term rental owners can't hit their numbers, many pivot into long-term rentals at the same time, flooding the market and pushing prices down further. It turns into a domino effect where everyone is trying to rent to the same shrinking pool. Phoenix is another Sunbelt giant that got hot fast and is cooling fast. Migration and construction ran side by side for years, and developers kept building like demand would stay permanently elevated. In 2025, you're seeing what happens when the new supply arrives, but the growth rate slows. Rents are down, concessions are aggressive, and many properties that had waiting lists are now marketing hard. Owners are throwing in free months, move-in specials, and flexible terms because vacancy is the real threat. And just like in other boom markets, investors who bought at peak pricing are feeling the squeeze: higher financing costs, higher insurance and maintenance, and less rental income than the spreadsheet promised. Dallas has long worn the unstoppable badge: corporate relocations, a steady influx of new residents, and a sense that the metro can absorb anything. But even Dallas can overbuild. In 2025, rents have slipped in key submarkets, and vacancies, especially in the higher-end segment, are rising. The pattern is consistent: lots of A-class product delivered into a world where renters are more price-sensitive than they were 2 years ago. Landlords who relied on steady rent growth to justify their costs now have to compete on discounts, perks, and lower asking prices. Meanwhile, property taxes and insurance don't politely decline just because rent did. That's where panic can start. When the unit is empty, the bills still arrive. Boise is the cautionary tale wrapped in a postcard. During the pandemic era, it became the symbol of escape: smaller city, lifestyle appeal, and remote work freedom. Demand surged, rents jumped, and builders rushed to meet what looked like endless interest. But Boise's core workforce isn't built on coastal tech salaries. When the remote work wave cooled and the hottest demand pulled back, the city was left with higher prices and a thinner pool of renters who can comfortably pay them. In 2025, rents are down sharply year over year, vacancies have climbed, and many of those glossy new buildings aren't filling the way owners expected. You can see the shift in the incentives: months of free rent, reduced deposits, and promotions that would have been laughed off during the peak. Seattle is a more psychological story than people admit. For years, it felt like a machine: tech money, growth, prestige, and rents that climbed like gravity didn't apply. But 2025 has brought a different tone. Seattle tech layoffs, startup pullbacks, and a slower hiring environment have weakened the high-income renter base that props up luxury pricing. And the remote work shift changed the why of living there. Some people still want Seattle, but fewer feel they must pay any price to be near an office. When that urgency disappears, tenants start negotiating again. Discounts show up in buildings that used to feel untouchable, and the skyline starts telling a new story: not collapse in a dramatic single moment, but a steady erosion of the assumptions that made the market feel invincible. San Francisco is the sharpest example of what happens when a city's identity and its housing market get tangled together. When tech was fully concentrated and in-person was the default, demand had a kind of built-in pressure. But remote work didn't just happen there, it hardened. And when that becomes permanent, downtown rents can't rely on the old rhythm of constant arrivals. In 2025, rents are down hard, vacancy is elevated, and landlords are leaning heavily on incentives to compete. Layer in quality of life concerns and the perception battle the city has been fighting, and you get a market where even significant price cuts don't instantly restore demand. The bigger point is, once confidence breaks, it's not automatically repaired.